Before we get to our lesson today, we're just going to do a quick little warm-up reminder of what we learned in our last lesson about parallel and perpendicular slopes. So if I have a slope of 5 over 2 and I wanted to get a slope that was perpendicular to this, remember the perpendicular will be a negative reciprocal. So if the slope was 5 over 2, the reciprocal would be 2 over 5. And since this is positive, the negative one would be going the opposite direction in the perpendicular direction of negative 2 over 5. Okay? If the slope was 5 over 2 and I'm looking for a parallel slope, the slope would be exactly the same, and our slope would be 5 over 2. If the slope is negative 5, the parallel slope would be negative 5. Why don't you try these next three on your own and push pause and come back and see if you got those right. All right, so for this one, negative 5, if our slope is negative 5, remember that this is actually a fraction. It's the fraction negative 5 over 1. And since I want the perpendicular slope, I need the negative reciprocal. So the reciprocal of 5 over 1 is 1 over 5. And since this is negative, then our perpendicular one must be positive. So the negative of a negative is positive. Here's another one. M is 1/9. Perpendicular would be the reciprocal, the negative reciprocal, which would be negative 9 over 1, which you probably would just say is negative 9. Both are equally correct. And our last one, M is negative 5 over 7. Perpendicular would be the negative reciprocal. Flip these over, becomes 7 over 5. Since this is negative, this one becomes positive. So that's going to be really valuable for what we're going to do today, because today we're going to talk about parallel and perpendicular equations and using parallel and perpendicular equations instead of just the slopes. So in these four questions, I want you to imagine like it's a little investigation you got to figure out. And you're going to be using the clues from the question to be able to get your equation. So your goal is to write an equation of a line. And the equations of a line, remember, are like this: y equals mx plus b. So that's our goal, okay? We're going to use the clues to figure out what our equation is for our line. And this first one has two clues. It says, find the equation of our line. And the first clue is that it's parallel to this line. And the second clue is it has a y-intercept of this. So if my goal is to get the slope and the y-intercept, the m and the b, well, I already have there. That's a really great clue. It tells you right away that your y-intercept is 6. So you know that b is going to be 6. Now, the slope of our line is parallel to this line. So it's not the same as this line. It's parallel to it. So first, we have to figure out what the slope of this line is, because once we figure out the slope of this line, we know that I line is parallel to it. So what's the slope of this line? Well, since this is in y equals mx plus b, negative 4 is the slope of this line. And since our line is parallel to it, we want the parallel slope. It's also going to be negative 4. So we've used the two clues in the equation to get our m and our b for our y equals mx plus b. And we've got our m right here and our b right there. So now we just got to fill in this, the y equals mx plus b. So I know the equation is going to be y equals, the slope is negative 4, so we know that it's going to be negative 4x, right? The x goes, or the slope goes in front of the x. Don't forget the x. Plus our y-intercept is 6, so it's going to be plus 6. And we found our equation of the line using these two clues. So sometimes the clues are going to be nice and easy, like this one. It's just going to tell you what it is. Or sometimes you might have to do a little investigating. You see down here, we're going to have to find them parallel, perpendicular, and the slopes and the equations look a little bit different. All right, let's try another one. Perpendicular to this equation and a y-intercept of negative 5. So again, really great clue. It tells you right away the y-intercept is negative 5. Okay, now we need a slope. Our slope is going to be perpendicular to this one. So first, let's figure out what the slope of this guy is. Well, it's the same as the one over here. So the slope of this guy is negative 4. But our equation, our line that we're trying to figure out, is perpendicular to this. You see, it says perpendicular. So what is perpendicular to negative 4? Well, remember, negative 4 is 4 over 1. And if it's perpendicular, we're going to take the reciprocal, so it becomes 1 over 4. And if this one's negative, then our perpendicular has to be positive. And now we've figured out our slope and our y-intercept. And we can take those two bits of information and write our equation in y equals mx plus b. So it's y equals, our slope is 1/4, so it's 1/4 x. Our y-intercept is -5, so we just say -5. Remember, don't say plus -5. Don't have two operations right beside each other. You just say it's -5. Okay, now with each question, the clues become less and less vague, or less and less helpful, excuse me. They're more and more vague. So we're going to have to use our knowledge of parallel and perpendicular lines and use our knowledge of equations of lines to be able to dig out the clues so that we can come up with our equation. So for example, in this one, our equation is parallel to this one. So if you notice, this is not in y equals mx plus b form. It's got this 2 in there. So we need to put this in y equals mx plus b form just to figure out our slope. How do we do that? Well, since it's 2y, we're going to have to divide everything by 2. So dividing by 2, of course, makes this just a 1y. What's 4 divided by 2? That's 2, so that's 2x. And -1 divided by 2 is -1/2. Now, this y-intercept isn't great, but guess what? We really don't care about the y-intercept of this line. All we care about is its slope, because ours is going to be parallel to it. So the slope of this guy is 2. And ours is parallel, so a parallel slope will also be 2. And we've got our slope. The y-intercept is not part of the clue. Okay, our y-intercept comes from this clue. It says it's the same y-intercept as this equation. Well, this equation doesn't look very exciting. It just says y equals 3x. The y-intercept would be here, the plus b, but there isn't one there, which means it's like a plus 0. So that means that our y-intercept must just be 0. And we're getting that from this clue. So now I've got my slope and I've got my y-intercept, so I can get my equation is y equals 2x plus 0. Now I'm not going to write down the plus 0 because it's not necessary. And I've got my answer. It's just y equals 2x. One thing I want to stress, the clue only says that it's parallel to this, so I don't care what the y-intercept of this is. And here it says it has the same y-intercept as this, so I don't care about the slope. I only care about the y-intercept from this clue, the slope from this clue to get our equation. And our equation that is parallel to this and has the same y-intercept of that is right here. And now our last one, perpendicular to this and the same y-intercept as this. So again, more vague, we have to do a little bit of more hunting. So it says it's perpendicular to this one. Perpendicular refers to the slope then. I don't care about the y-intercept, I just care about the slope. So the slope of this guy is 1/2. Ours is perpendicular, so we need a perpendicular slope. Perpendicular is the negative reciprocal, so 1/2 becomes 2/1. And since this is positive, that becomes negative. So I use the clue to get our slope is going to be a negative 2/1. Now it says it's the same y-intercept as this. Well, again, here's an example of an equation that's not in y equals mx plus b form. So you're going to have to rearrange to put it in y equals mx plus b form. So this is x equals y plus 5. Well, in y equals mx plus b form, we need the y by itself, which means we have to get rid of this plus 5. How do I do that? Opposite operation. I'm going to subtract 5 from this side and subtract 5 from that side. And so it becomes x minus 5 equals y. You can also imagine how we did it in graspable math, where if we take this plus 5 and move it to the opposite side, it does the opposite operation and subtracts 5. Now this doesn't look like y equals mx plus b form, but it is. It's just in the opposite side. We normally see it like this, so we would put that y on that side and the x minus 5 on this side. Now that it's on this form, we only care about the y-intercept. I don't care what the slope of this line is. It says the clue is the y-intercept. So I only care about the y-intercept right there. And the y-intercept is -5. Great. So now I've got my 2 bits of information for my y equals mx plus b. I've got my slope and I've got my y-intercept. And so it's going to be y equals my slope, which is perpendicular to this one. My slope is negative 2 over 1 x plus minus 5. So I don't say plus minus, I just say minus 5. And you might write it like this, and that's totally acceptable. But if you notice that negative 2 over 1 is the same as just negative 2, so you could write it as y equals negative 2x minus 5. So all of this is taking your knowledge of y equals mx plus b, which is this entire unit, and using what we learned yesterday about parallel and perpendicular slopes to be able to dissect the clues to get equations of lines. So what you're going to do now is I've given you a Google Doc with all sorts of clues, and they're written out a little bit differently than the other ones, but it's a little bit simpler here. You're going to take all these clues and you're simply going to write the equations down. You might need to do a little bit of extra work, maybe off to the side on a scrap of piece of paper, kind of like what we did over here, some rearranging and scribbling. All I'm going to ask, though, is that you write your equation down here. So I'm actually going to go to the Google Doc right now. Here's the Google Doc, and I'm just going to do 2 questions with you. So m is 3 and b is negative 5. So these are perfect clues. It's telling you what the slope is and the y-intercept. And so you just go here, the slope is 3, so that means 3x. And since it's the b is negative 5, you're just going to say minus 5. And that question's done for you. I'll leave that there for when I share this with you. Same idea for the other ones here, but now you get into parallel and y-intercept. So you got to read the slope off this guy and use this y-intercept to come up with your equation. I'm going to do g with you. It's y equals 7x plus 3. It's perpendicular to that and the same y-intercept as that. So first let's go and look at this guy. We need the slope from this. So right here is the slope. It's 7. So maybe on a scrap of piece of paper, I'm going to write 7 over 1. Mine is perpendicular. So what's the reciprocal of 7 over 1? That's 1 over 7. So I'm going to write that down, 1 over 7. Now, unfortunately, the fraction is going to look like that here, and that's not a big deal. But be careful, it's not just 1 over 7. Since this one's positive, my slope is negative 1 over 7. So there's my slope. I'm going to put an x after it. Next, I need the y-intercept. And the clue for the y-intercept is here. It says it's the same y-intercept as this guy. So I don't care about this 1/2. All I care about is the y-intercept. And it's the same one. So this is a 9. So mine must also be a 9. So I'm going to go plus 9. And I've got my equation. You notice you still had to do a little bit of work, and you might maybe do that on a scrap piece of paper in order to figure out your equation. Okay? As you get down further, you see here's an example where it's 3y equals something. So you're going to have to use what you did in these questions here, divide in order to put it in y equals mx plus b to get your answer. Again, that might be something you want to scribble off to the side. Here you might need to do a little bit of work on both of these, all of these, to figure out what your slope is and what your y-intercept is for your equation. But your goal then is to complete these 10 equations, and all you'll need to do is write the equations down. So best of luck with this, and good luck.